Well, hello there. My name is Marie Cook. I'm co-founder of Nathaniel's Hope, and we're so excited to have with us today Scarlett Kibbey from Jacksonville, Florida, who's going to be talking to us today about the Florida Medicaid waiver, the who, what, why, how, all those questions that we have about it. And Scarlett has had a lot of experience. She has been for over 11 years. She was a former waiver support coordinator and knows a lot of information about that. And for the last 10 years has been a benefits consultant in this industry. And I know, Scarlett, we're so happy to have you with us today and to share so much information. I know it can be so overwhelming for parents, just the day-to-day activity of having a child with a disability, no matter what age, younger or older, but it can all be all-consuming. And it just seems like you're thrown into this world and there's so much to know, and there's a whole new vocabulary, a whole new language and everything. And so many times it's so hard to know where to start. And so we're glad you're here with us today to gain some clarity on this whole topic of the Florida Med waiver. So maybe we could just start by having you just begin to define what this is, and we'll just start talking about it.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. It's an honor to be able to serve all of you families. So my goal today is to share the basics with you, including what it is, who's eligible, and most importantly, what it actually looks like and can do for your family. And the reason I say family is because even though your child will be the one receiving the actual services, the waiver won't just benefit them. It will benefit your whole family. The program itself is nothing short of a miracle. I have seen it give parents a break, allow them to take their other children to events and do things with them, to focus on their marriage. And most importantly, it allows them to have the peace of mind knowing that they can give their child everything they need and deserve to live the fullest and best life. So first off, the Florida Medicaid waiver is a government funded program. It is not income-based. In fact, it's the only public program in the state of Florida that is not based on the household income. So that in and of itself makes it very special. What the waiver does is it provides Medicaid and services to people with very specific disabilities. And I'm actually going to, because there's so much information and so many categories and lists, I'm going to cheat a little. I have some things in writing so that I don't miss anything.
We'll go right ahead. This is such a wide topic, and I know you're going to cover things here today, and there's going to be a lot of questions, and we'll leave a little time for questions, but also we'll direct folks at the end of this to another place where they can get more information. So we appreciate it.
And if I miss anything or you have questions along the way, please, Marie, don't hesitate to interrupt and ask, because if you have them, I'm pretty sure all of the parents have them too.
Yeah, and I was going to mention, if you have a question, feel free to type it in the question and answer space at the bottom of the screen there, and we'll do our best to answer them. But I think this is such a big topic of discussion. So
yes, it is. So the first part of it is the easiest part. Well, actually, it's not the easiest part, but it seems to be where the best part to start. So the categories are autism spectrum disorder, and that is the more severe forms of autism, intellectual disability with an IQ of 70 or below, spina bifida, cerebral palsy, Prader-Willi syndrome, Down syndrome, individuals between ages 3 and 5 who are at high risk of one of those disabilities. And then also the last one, the one I saved for last, it was added the most recently. It's called Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And a special note about Phelan-McDermid syndrome is that for those who apply under that category, they don't wait on the waiting list. There was a special grant, and that category is fully funded. So if anyone on here right now has a child with a diagnosis of Phelan-McDermid and you haven't applied, you should really apply. And if you have applied and you're somehow mistakenly on the waiting list, contact your local APD office because you should be on the waiver and receiving services. So from there, those are the categories of who qualifies. From there, what the waiver actually does, the very first thing is someone who becomes eligible and is actually placed on the waiver. The first thing that happens is they receive Medicaid if they're not already receiving it. And where this is so important is that most parents whose kids are under age 18, they may not qualify for Social Security because Social Security is based on the household income. So that would mean your child cannot get Medicaid benefits. And waiver is pretty much the only way for these parents to be able to access the Medicaid system. So when your child's accepted onto the waiver, they get Medicaid because they're now considered a family of one. Medicaid itself is probably one of the biggest benefits of getting on the waiver. Medicaid at certain ages pays for things all the way from your therapies. So speech therapy, occupational, physical therapy, behavior therapy, respiratory therapy, feeding therapy. Medicaid covers all of those services, and it also acts as health insurance. It also will cover things like consumable medical supplies. So for those of you who are spending several $100s a month on diapers, Medicaid would cover that. It covers nutritional supplements. It covers something called personal care services, which are basically services for that gap between when a parent is still at work and their child gets out of school. So for a lot of parents from 3 till 5 or 6, they're having to pay out of pocket for a much higher quality, therefore a much higher rate of staff to take care of their child. So that is something that Medicaid covers. And then things that the waiver itself cover are probably the most important service is support coordination. So that's a case manager who helps you and advocates for your child. So they help you navigate all of those different systems, the Medicaid system, the waiver system, and they help you advocate for the services and supports that your child needs. Those services and supports can be as all-encompassing as group home or residential placement. They can be respite care. So respite care is a service that's provided in the home to families whose children are under age 21. And it's specifically designed to give parents a break, to let you go to the doctor or go on a date or take a nap. So respite is a huge service. Personal supports is a very similar service. It is almost the same, but it's for people who are over the age of 21. As we're getting into adulthood, the services change, and those services include things like supported living coaching to help someone live more independently, supported employment. It can cover things like nursing care, specialized medical equipment. I mentioned the supplies. When someone's older and no longer in school, it would cover an adult day program and transportation to and from, which is huge because it allows parents to continue to work when there's nowhere else for their child to go. It covers environmental adaptions. So like major home modifications, widening of doorways, ramps, lifts for those of you who are lifting your children. Those are really the big biggies that I see it cover. It does cover not environmental, it covers vehicle modifications as well. So like for families who need to modify their van and add a lift and do all of that, it is extremely cost prohibitive. And so having waiver to cover big ticket things like that is pretty amazing.
Well, I mean, this sounds like incredible.
It
But
is.
we've all heard about that there's a really long waiting list to
Yes.
get on it. What is the waiting list to get on
Okay.
to
Okay.
this?
So I have stopped going on the APD website and torturing myself by looking at the waiting list numbers. The last I checked, it was in the 23,000 range, which just tells you how many people really desperately need those services. So yes, there is that waiting list. And the reason there is a waiting list is because it's not a fully funded program. Many states in the US, their waivers are fully funded. Florida is just one of those states that where we haven't gotten to that point yet. My feelings on that are that parents are so busy and overwhelmed with caring for their children that they don't always have the time to let their local politicians know this is extremely important to them. But the more parents who voice these needs and that there's this deficit, and to be honest with you, the higher those wait list numbers, the more it demonstrates to our lawmakers that we need help. Um, so yes, there is a waiting list, and it is very long,
So,
but
so should we be discouraged that if the waiting list is that long? Like, it doesn't seem like, how can I get help then for my loved one?
so that is my hope by the end of this webinar, that I've shared enough information about the waiver and parents can see what it will actually do now and for the rest of their child's life, so that they're willing to wade through the tape and put in the effort. So that's kind of my goal for the webinar, is hopefully I have given you enough info that by the end of this, you're all filling out applications and, you know, looking up what to send and where to send it. So there are ways around the waiting list. Well, there are a couple ways. Are you okay, Marie?
I'm gonna black out here a minute. Oh, keep
Okay, okay, I'll keep rambling.
talking.
So when someone is determined eligible, they apply and then they're placed on the waiting list. They're placed in one of 7 categories, which we can go over after this. The categories really aren't as important as what you do once you're on the waiting list. So initially, when you get on the waiting list, you should be talked to by APD, and they should ask if you meet certain criteria. So that criteria is called crisis criteria. If a family is determined to meet that criteria, there is a process you can go through to apply for crisis services, which if you're approved, then you would be on the waiver. The other 2 ways that you can come off of the wait list in a somewhat timely manner or without being on crisis is, one, every few years, APD, which stands for Agency for Persons with Disabilities, and they're the government agency who runs and manages this program. Every few years, APD gets extra funding, and they're told, just go ahead and do whatever you can to get people off the waiting list. So they will send out letters, which I refer to as lottery letters, to let families know that there's extra funding. And if you would like a spot on the waiver, then please just call us and let us know. I personally know at least a handful of families who have received those lottery letters in the last few years. From the time I started as a support coordinator 16 years ago, I know dozens and dozens of families who received those letters. So that's one reason to apply and, you know, endure the wait list if you're not in crisis. Another thing that happens, and I'm told is happening, is that instead of just a little bit of money being given to APD, a whole lot of money is given to APD, and they're able to, well, once in a while, completely wipe the waiting list clean. So basically put everyone who's on the waiting list onto the waiver. That's, I think, only happened once, but Other times they're given enough funding to pull entire categories from the waiting list. So the rumor that I'm hearing right now is that categories 1, 2, and 3 should be coming off the waiting list because they've received enough funding or estimated enough funding to be able to serve that many more families. So those are kind of the 3 ways to circumvent the waiting list. That being said, even if you don't meet crisis and one of those other 2 things isn't impacting you right now, staying in close contact with your APD liaison at your local office is very important. A lot of times parents, honestly, a lot of times parents are in crisis and they're just so used to getting through that they don't know they're in crisis, or they're in crisis and they're taking care of their kids and they're doing what needs to be done, and they don't have time to jump through the hoops to apply for crisis then. That doesn't mean that after the crisis is over, you can't reach out and ask for help. Many times I see families who are coming out of the crisis, or they feel they're coming out of the crisis, and they have the time to be able to speak with APD and gather documents and try to get that help. And they're still technically in crisis because when APD looks at it and says, you know, the family thinks, oh, well, this is nothing. And then APD looks at it and says, well, actually, in fact, that's still quite a bit of a crisis. So you qualify for services.
So Scarlett, let me interrupt you there. I'm back. I
Yes.
apologize. I'm getting over a nasty cold here. But what is the definition of a crisis?
So that is a little subjective. And I will give you the 3 categories. I can't really go into all the specifics, but category 1 is homelessness. Now, for everyone who's on here, I'm pretty sure your kids aren't homeless, so you're not going to meet that criteria. The second category is danger to self or others. And this, you know, it can just be behaviors that are aggressive or dangerous, but it can actually be something like someone who isn't self-aware enough to keep themselves safe. Then they become a danger to themselves. And then the third category is called caregiver unable to give care. And this is for situations where the caregiver is either has their own health issues, they're maybe taking care of their elderly parents, their spouse may no longer be with them, or may need their care as well. They may have minor children, other children, multiple children with disabilities. This category is probably the most broad and usually the one that families fall into. APD has legal statutes that list out the specific category and then the little subcategories and examples underneath. So it's a lot more subjective and broad than those 3 categories suggest.
So I'm just thinking, if you find yourself in crisis, how fast can you get help and support?
Not as quickly as you should be able to. APD, again, that stands for Agency for Persons with Disabilities, is, to my knowledge, the only government agency in the state of Florida that operates on a specific budget and is held to that budget. That being said, they're very understaffed and really just trying to serve as many people and do the best they can. But what that ends up looking like is everything takes time. So typically from the day a family applies for crisis, reaches out to APD, they usually take 30 to 60 days to gather all the documentation and make their decision on yes or no, you meet the criteria and we're placing you on the waiver. From there, if the family has Medicaid already, then it's a much quicker process. They would then interview support coordinators, choose the best one, the best fit, and then they would come on the waiver and begin receiving services. So that would be probably another 30, 60 days. If they don't already have Medicaid, then Medicaid needs to be applied for. It's a separate system. Um, so that is pretty much beyond APD's control, which is really unfortunate. Medicaid sometimes can come through in a week, which is pretty rare. Usually it's 3 to 4 weeks, but sometimes there are delays and it can be several more months. So it can be a pretty lengthy process to parents who maybe have a surgery coming up or something that they know they're planning for and they don't want it to be a crisis, but they know it could lead to it. I would recommend they reach out to APD now and try to start that process, because by the time they get there, they will truly be in the crisis.
So let's talk about what the process, how do you start the process?
So there are a lot of you on here who I saw it was kind of split down the middle, either young kids or kids in their 20s. The first thing you need to do is you need to apply. You need to do the application and submit all the documentation that APD requires. They will then review it. They have 60 days legally to review the documentation and determine if you meet the criteria, which would be those disabilities. And for autism and intellectual disability, not just that diagnosis, but actually checking boxes on specifics on how heavily it impacts you. So then once they determine you're eligible, then you're placed on that waiting list. Then you can apply for crisis. A long time ago, you were able to do both at the same time. If a family was in crisis and wasn't on the waiting list, then they could apply for crisis and have their eligibility reviewed at the same time. APD no longer does that, probably because there are just so many applicants. It's very hard. And the two processes are very different. One is specifically about that disability, and then the other is how that disability is impacting the family situation and health and safety. So
So once you get on that wait list, it could be years before you get off the wait list, unless you fall into a crisis that can move you on.
So actually, and I touched on this a little when you were having your coughing fits, there are two other ways. One is the lottery letters, which is my favorite way to describe them, because every few years APD gets a little bit of funding and then they pull people from the waiting list. And what that looks like is them sending out letters to families that just say, hey, we have some extra money. Do you want a spot? And I know plenty of families who have received these letters over the years, and I call them lottery letters because I usually tell them, now you should go play, call APD and now go play the lottery, because sometimes it's only 500 in a year that go out. And if you're one of those 500, then you're pretty lucky. You're very, very fortunate. And then the other way is if the waiver becomes fully funded or even a heftier chunk of funding. So years and years ago, I think it was 2000, that was when the waiver was first, there was a waiting list and it became fully funded. So our governor at the time said, you know what, whatever amount of money, we're funding it. And so the waiting list was eliminated completely. So, you know, that right there to me is reason to jump through the hoops and get on the waiting list. And you could get lucky and get the lottery letter, or our lawmakers could see that we really need this help and they could fully fund the waiver, and then everyone would come off the waiting list.
Right. Are there any states that don't have waiting lists like this? Are there states that
there are Arizona, I believe, has no waiting list. California has no waiting list. New York has no waiting list. Pennsylvania, New Jersey. I think most of the small northern states have no waiting list. States who have really high income tax usually have no waiting list. They can afford it. But yeah, there are quite a few states with no waiting list. North Carolina is about to not have a waiting list. They were actually sued by Disability Rights North Carolina, and having a waiting list was found to be discrimination. So they've been given a timeline to transition everyone from their waiting list to the waiver, which has basically forced their government to give them the money to make that happen.
Well,
So
some people are asking here about the application, and somebody just shared a link, but also I wanted to let you know that after this webinar is over, we will be sending you, Scarlett has provided us the application. We'll be emailing that to you as well, as an attachment along with the recording of this webinar as well. So, okay. There are lots of questions coming up here. People are asking here. Somebody was asking about what are the categories 1, 2, and 3 that you said should be coming off the waiting list.
I have that list here because I mix these up. So category 1 for pre, and they're actually not calling it the waiting list any longer. They're remarketing it as pre-enrollment.
Oh, pre-enrollment. Okay.
Yes.
That's has more of a positive.
It sounds much better. It does sound much better, but it is the waiting list.
Okay.
So category 1 includes clients deemed to be in crisis, which is homelessness, danger to self or others, or caregiver. Unfortunately, when you are placed on the waiting list, they don't really do an assessment of if you're in crisis. So a lot of families who are in crisis, they apply, they get placed on the waiting list. They assume they're going to be placed in category 1 because they know they meet the criteria. But APD hasn't developed a way to do the formal assessment as they do the eligibility determination. Again, that's why I tell parents to stay in contact with their local APD office so that as their situation changes, they can be updating APD. And if what the category they're in should change, then they need to notify APD and make that happen. So category 2 is basically for anyone who has an open case with DCF. That being said, I don't think it's necessarily an open case. I think it's those people who are in the foster care DCF system. And then that has a couple subcategories. They're either transitioning out of foster care, they're 18 but not 22, and they're receiving extended foster care, or they're over 18 but not 22 and are coming out of the foster care system. And then category 3 it includes clients whose caregiver has a documented condition that is expected to render the caregiver unable to provide care within the next 12 months, and for whom an alternate caregiver is not available. It's also for those who are at substantial risk of incarceration or court commitment. For those who have documented behaviors or physical needs that place them at high risk. Those who are discharging from a mental health facility or a skilled nursing facility. And then category 4 includes caregivers who are 70 years of age or older. That has actually changed very, very recently. I think it went into effect immediately in March. And that age is no longer 60, but or no longer 70. It's actually been dropped to age 60, which is phenomenal. But it's not just for someone who's age 60 and older. It's for those who are 60 and older and no one else. They don't have any other support or anyone to take care of their child. Category 5 is for individuals who are expected to graduate within the next 12 months from secondary school and need meaningful day. And category 6 is clients 21 and older who don't meet category 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And then category 7, which is probably the category that everyone in here is in, even if it's not the category you should be in. My experience is almost everyone gets lumped into category 7. And that's clients who are younger than 21 and don't meet the criteria for 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or 6. Yes. So those are the categories, and they're actually on APD's website. A lot of this information is on APD's website.
Is that
And
apd.org? Is that what?
it's apdcares.org.
apdcares.org.
Yes, yes. And it's a lot more user friendly than it used to be. But it still isn't the easiest to navigate sometimes. Their search bar it searches the entire internet. So you'll be directed away from the page. But all of the offices and the contact info and things like that, the application is on there. Lots of information is on the APD website.
Okay, so apd.cares, be sure that you have that information. And I know as a parent, it's hard to just swim through all this, to get through all this information and everything. And we're getting a lot more. Go ahead.
That's my children tease me because this job is pretty consuming for me. And they joke with me that if APD and that process was easier, I wouldn't have a job. So yes, it is a process. And I know you guys are already in the thick of it with taking care of your kids, which makes it even more challenging. But depending on the office you're dealing with, some of the staff are just absolutely phenomenal. And again, to tap into these benefits really, I hope, makes parents see the need to do it. The first thing, you just need to fill out the application. It's pretty straightforward. We have some information on our website that you guys can look at if you need later. Again, APD has information on their website
so
as well.
So their website is APD Cares, but we're going to give this a few times. But at the top of the chat here, we have your website, which is snggroup.org, that you provide a lot of more information than what we can cover today, and a lot of videos and webinars and things like that.
Yes, and they're short for you guys. I don't like to hear myself talk this much. So the videos that I do have are on one little topic, and they're usually 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So I'm very digestible. But the first step is to fill out the application. It's 4 pages. And then APD also has a release, which I've shared with you and everyone will receive. They have a specific release. So those 2 things are the 2 APD forms. Then there's also a list of documents they need. So identifying documents, Social Security card, birth certificate, a parent's ID or guardianship paperwork. And then the most important documents, and the hardest usually, are the diagnostic documents that show that your child has this disability that you're applying under. We included, again, a list of what those documents look like, what they are based on the category of disability. So each disability requires different documentation to be sent. The other important thing is, while the statute doesn't say that the diagnosis, that they had to be diagnosed prior to age 18, it says that it had to manifest prior to age 18. So if you have documented diagnostics prior to age 18, that is best. That is really what APD wants. It is a developmental disability. But if you can't find those, for those of you whose kids are older, it's literally impossible to get school records. They no longer exist. You can have the diagnosis made again at a later date, but you will still need to show that history. So older paperwork, that can be IEPs, doctor's records, things like that. You basically just need to show that this existed. And even if it wasn't diagnosed, autism is a great one for that. Someone who's 50, I don't know that autism existed back then. So they're not going to have, but they probably, in all of their records, they show all of those characteristics. So a diagnosis of autism at an age later than 18 can and should be accepted by APD, as long as you can prove that those things did exist prior to that diagnosis. Yeah, so it's not easy, but it's worth it.
So once you make the application, and then, I mean, we don't want anybody to fall into crisis. So if you don't fall into crisis, do you just sit and wait then and then hope you get the lottery? Or is there anything else proactive that you can do?
I tell parents to stay in touch. I mean, stay in touch with APD. Once you're determined eligible, you'll get a letter, and from that letter, you will then start reaching out to your local office. Usually, and things are changing and shifting with APD, but prior to the last year or so, you were assigned what was called a general revenue worker. So basically, a case manager who works for APD, who handles the people, they have a certain number of people who are on the waiting list. Make them your friend. Get their phone number, get their email address, get their supervisor's email address, and email them every few months, especially if things are changing and shifting for you quickly. Email them regularly, call them. If you feel you're in crisis, call them. But at least once a year, be staying in touch with them and checking in, so that, hopefully maybe that'll put your name at the top.
Yeah, somebody says here, what can I do? But the case manager does not respond to my phone calls or emails.
I may know who this person is. And again, I would go on the APD website, look up what office is in your county is in, look up that person, and then start moving your way up. And I'm never the one who says, oh, just go straight to the top. But there are times, and I will tell you, some of these case managers have 1,000 people on their caseload. Wow. I know that for a long time, APD was on a hiring freeze. So anyone who left, they weren't allowed to hire for that position.
Wow.
So they are really shorthanded. That being said, if you can't get anywhere, contact your local representative and let them know. My line of thinking is, it's not necessarily that you're tattling on APD, but if they don't have the funds to help you families, then the only people who can change that are the politicians.
So let me talk about this. I mean, I'm
Yes.
feeling the more I'm working with families and have, such a heart for, I mean, you guys are my heroes, the things that you walk through on a daily basis, and there's not enough services, not enough support. What can we do? What can maybe parents do, but other people from the community do when you say contact your local officials, or what level, or what can we be doing to activate? I mean, I'm sure there's people that are lobbying and trying to get funding, but is there anything grassroots level that just normal parents can do to help the cause?
I think reaching out to whoever your local representative is, I mean, I think you can just look up my local representative and type in your zip code, and it'll populate their name and contact info. Letting them know that there are a lot of us. Like, there are so many. I mean, the wait list is only 23,000. Realistically, that wait list should probably be closer to 100,000. So they don't know, they just think that, oh, there's 23,000 more people who need help. For all of you who aren't on that waiting list, you're not part of that. They're not looking at it and really assessing how many people truly need this help. And the other piece of that is, this is all taxpayer funded. It is our money. And we should have a say with what is being done with it. So voicing that in the most positive way possible, I will add, that's definitely catch more flies with honey. And I know a lot of parents have a lot of issues and complaints with APD, but trying to understand that they really are are trying to do their best 99% of the time.
They're trying to help, but they've got limited resources.
Very limited.
Yeah, JJ Holmes here says Florida is the 49th in the nation for funding this program. So
Yeah.
you probably knew that.
I did.
But
I think Louisiana might be 50.
okay, so we've got room for improvement, but
Yes.
they're saying it's your state representatives, your state senator who are the ones deciding whether to fund the waiver. Florida's a huge budget surplus. We need to contact our legislators to use some of the
Mhm.
surplus for our most vulnerable Floridians. Another looming problem is the plan to switch the waiver over to managed care. The pilot program is getting a huge financial boost. I don't know, do you want to talk about that?
I am not well versed enough on that. I tend to stay in my lane, and my lane is the
Waiver.
direct helping the parents, and these are the things you can do, and this is how to do it. But yeah, the advocates who delve into that are
Yeah.
phenomenal and amazing.
Right. Well, it sounds at the very least contacting your state representative, state senator, everybody could do something. If we can just
Yeah.
all do something as one voice coming forward, that maybe we can make a difference in this, because certainly we can move out of the 49th place. We should,
Yes, I would
we,
hope so.
we need to be moving out of that. So, okay, we have a few other questions here. Do you need an SSI application and denial letter to submit for the Medicaid waiver?
No,
Okay.
you do not. Now, when you submit for crisis, there are, if your child's under age 21, you may be asked, or under age 18, Medicaid waiver is considered the payer of last resort. And so they want to see that you've tapped into other benefits before they say yes. That being said, to just apply, no. And even for crisis, technically, it's not on that list.
Okay, and somebody has relocated from Florida. They were in a waiver in another state. Now do I have to start over in Florida?
Unfortunately, yes. Although there is one category where you still have to apply and kind of start over, but you can skip the waiting list because if you're military and your child was living in, say, Nebraska, you're living in Nebraska, your child's on the waiver in Nebraska, and you are restationed and relocated to Florida through no fault of your own, you can apply and then you will skip the line
Okay,
and go straight on the waiver. But yes, for everyone else, just because you're on the waiver in another state, it doesn't translate over. Again, talk to your legislators, let them know that your benefits should transfer from state to state.
yeah,
They
yeah.
can make that happen.
So much of I realize we've become in Nathaniel's Hope here really big advocates, and we just realize that we just need to keep educating and educating people who don't know the world of disability and the day-to-day challenges. And a lot of times it's just ignorance. They're not informed or they haven't allowed
Experienced it.
experienced it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And you don't know what you don't know. But
right.
I think as more and more families are out in the community and interacting with everyone, the more people the more lives you guys touch, the more other people can look at it and say, wow, this family is amazing and we should be helping. That little bit of help can do so much.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Okay, a few other things here. Do you have all this information in Spanish?
I do not. However, APD's website does have,
Translated to
I
Spanish?
believe, yes, at
Okay.
least 2 other languages.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
And then somebody says, if I sent an application a couple of years ago, should I have received communication or should I reapply?
Call APD first. I would not do all that paperwork again until you call them, and they should be able to check their system. They'll need your child's name, date of birth, and social security number, but they should be able to check and they can let you know. Also, on that note, my recommendation to parents is, I know that certified mail seems like a good way, but don't do it. Scan it and email everything. That way you have a paper trail. You can prove that you sent it, that it was received, and never, never, never send originals. Ever.
Okay, that is well received. You heard that. Never send the originals.
Keep
Okay.
your originals.
Yes. Okay, my friend Robin here has a question. My child has the top two diagnoses you mentioned, autism spectrum, intellectual disability, and yet I've been denied. What happens with a denial happen?
Uh,
We do have a
um,
Medicaid at this time.
so to you, I would say contact Disability Rights Florida. They're very familiar with this issue. And this is something, I'll just give a little bit of information. We could have a 2-day sit down about this. There may or may not be a bit of an agenda to restrict some categories, and those categories are autism and intellectual disability. The reason being is they're not just a check the box. So all of the other disabilities are pretty much a medical diagnosis, so they just check a box. Those, they want to see the severity level, and it leaves it's more subjective, I would say. There are some lawsuits in the works. I've worked with a handful of families who have reapplied and resubmitted new documentation and been accepted. I have other families who have gone through the hearing process and taken the legal route. They've hired attorneys, or they're working with disability rights. Unfortunately, I see more of those than I should. So that it's really subjective. It's really case by case. I would say contact disability rights, look up the statutes and check things out for yourself to see. Sometimes it's just a matter of not submitting enough information and they just give a blanket denial. So they don't tell you specifically. But if you go through, you can check out the information on our website, you can check out APDs, kind of investigate it and see for yourself. But I mean, I just say keep reapplying. I mean, eventually they'll probably get sick of you and say yes. I think you're muted, Marie. And I'm a terrible lip
I keep
reader.
muting myself in case I cough. I'm trying not to make this an unpleasant experience for everybody, but when approved for services at the hearing level, how long does it take to receive information on next steps?
Oh, okay. So approved for services at the hearing level. So you can go to hearing for a lot of different things. You can go to hearing because you were denied your application and denied eligibility. You can go to hearing if you applied for crisis and were denied and feel that you met it. You can also go to hearing if you're on the waiver and they've reduced your benefits or budget. So any of those situations, you go to the hearing, you go through the hearing officer has 30 days to give their findings. And then if they don't agree with you and they side with APD and it's a negative finding, then you have another 30 days to take it to a Florida Court of Appeals. And I'm not an attorney, but I have gone through a lot of these. So that's the reason I know those dates and those deadlines, is just because I have that much experience with it, unfortunately.
Okay, will applying for benefits for my son now at the age of 10 subtract from his benefits when he's 18 and older?
No,
Okay, that's good news.
no.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so many great questions here. What about rare genetic disorders? What would that be treated similarly as, I can't say it, Flem-McDermott scenario?
No. Unfortunately, Phelan-McDermott, Down syndrome, and the other ones that are listed like that, they're the only specific ones on there that it's that specific. But what I will tell you is, so on our website, we actually have a link to some coffee chats, and I address that specifically in probably 2 or 3. While we're here, typically what happens with a rare genetic disorder is their intellectual disability or cerebral palsy are comorbid with that. So even though that's technically your child's primary, so Angelman syndrome, for example, I worked with a kid years ago who had Angelman's. And that was his primary diagnosis but for APD purposes, it was intellectual disability and I believe cerebral palsy. So you kind of have to dig through it and see. And so for some parents whose child maybe has a syndrome that cerebral palsy isn't one of them, you may have to have them tested for doing intelligence testing, IQ testing. And there is, if there are parents on here whose kiddos are not verbal, most parents are like, well, or even the schools will say, well, we can't test for that. That's not accurate. There's something called a test of nonverbal intelligence, the TONI, and you can request that. I recommend you do it through the school system so you're not footing the bill. But yeah, you have to get a little creative because the actual rare genetic disorders aren't the qualifiers, except for the few that are on there.
All right. And I just want to, I know we're coming to a close here in our time. And thank you so much for your time, Scarlett. But I don't know if parents are aware of CDC Plus, and wondering if you could just touch on that, because this could be a great resource for them if they're not aware
Yes.
of it.
Yes. I mean, if you couldn't tell from my happy dance, CDC Plus is my favorite thing. So CDC Plus is for families who are on the waiver, and it stands for Consumer Directed Care. And it basically turns your funding, so your yearly funding, your budget, instead of having to use an agency to provide those services, the parents can direct those funds and they can turn it into a monthly budget. So, you know, your monthly budget, depending on what your APD budget is, it could be $1,000 a month. You can then use that to hire your own employees, which also means you can hire a parent or a grandparent to provide the care. Another really cool thing about CDC Plus is when the parent is the paid caregiver, it's income tax exempt, so that money goes further. And then once it comes in, it's household income. So parents can go use that. I mean, you can hire a caregiver, you can do those things, or you can pay for alternative style therapies that no other funding source would cover. I have a couple families who do, they save it up and they pay for weeks of intensive camps that have done amazing things for their kiddos every summer. And they never would have been able to do that without CDC Plus.
It sounds amazing. So this is it's amazing. Somebody says, can the child be under 18 to participate in CDC Plus?
Yes, they absolutely can. Anyone who's on waiver.
Med waiver, yeah. So
yep. And waiver starts at age 5. And so you can apply at age 3, although you'll go on basically a different waiting list, like a pre-waiting list. And then once you have the specific diagnostics at age 5, then they'll usually put you on the real waiting list. Then you can go through that process. So I always say to start your application process at age 3, but it's pretty rare. I've only worked with and gotten a few families under age 6 onto the waiver. It's not impossible, but it's not common.
Okay, we have 2 more quick questions here. I think you already answered this. You need an SSI denial letter. I think you answered that. You don't need it.
Yeah, right. And we don't need it.
And if a person has a child that is 18 years old that has come from another country with intellectual disabilities and the parent is a citizen now, can they apply?
So on the APD application, it actually lists out the documents that your child needs. So the parent doesn't have to be a citizen. As long as the child is a citizen or a naturalized citizen, or they have a green card. Again, on the APD application, I think it's page 2, but it might be page 3. It goes into specifics about what documentation they need depending on. But as long as, yeah, they can apply.
Okay, awesome. Well, this has been such an incredible hour, Scarlett. Thank you so much. And I know I speak on behalf of all the families that are on today and those that are yet to be blessed by your talk here today, that this is so informative. You have just taken away the blinders on this whole scary topic of the med waivers. So we just want to say thank you to you. And I know, again, if you can mention, I know everybody wants to, I want to talk to Scarlett, but how can you, I know you've got a lot of great resources. And again, could you
Yes.
mention where they can find your resources?
Yes, yes. So if you go to my website, which is sngroup.org, that stands for Special Needs Guidance Group, but that was too big of a mouthful. Um, you can, you can start with, we have a great start here page, and we have assessments to see if you're all the way at the beginning and you're not even sure if you should waste your time. We have an eligibility quiz that goes through the statutes, and at the end of it, it'll tell you if you should apply or you shouldn't apply. Now, that doesn't mean that you'll be accepted. I'm not APD, which we wouldn't have any money if I was. But it does mean that you've met that legal statute. And we have tons and tons of other free resources on there. So the best way is to just go to the website. You can email us if you can't find the information you're looking for. Just letting you know, we're a very small organization, just two of us right now. So if you can try to look up the coffee chat videos, we have a weekly newsletter. Lots and lots of information on there. The goal is to give you guys enough info that you don't actually need me. You just need that. But for those of you, every case is individual. For those of you who hit roadblocks, who, have questions that you really just can't find the answers, or you're getting mixed answers, give us a shout by email, and we'll be happy to help.
Okay, awesome. Well, once again, Scarlett Kibbey, thank you for being with us today. And thank you all for joining us. And I hope this has been helpful. And I hope that everybody gets off of the waiting list
Yes.
very soon, and we will
Yes.
get a lot more support and help. So God bless you all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.